15,000 casualties in a single battle. The largest charge, single charge, that the Confederate Army makes in the entirety of the American Civil War. What place would that be? If I told you it wasn't Gettysburg, you'd probably call me a liar. But it wasn't Gettysburg. It was right here, the Battle of Gaines' Mill. So when you come out to battlefields, you generally focus in on the entirety of a battle and talk about the fight that happened out there, the massive troop movements and things like that. Well, I'm out at Gaines' Mill today, and we're going to focus in on one particular unit that was out here. And we'll talk a little bit about them. We'll give the story of John Bell Hood. Realistically, here at this battle of Gaines' Mill, this is where Lee realized that Texas always moves them, in his own words, from the Battle of the Wilderness in 1864. Here at Gaines' Mill, that's where that really starts. So the 4th Texas had been ordered up and sent out to Yorktown, and that's where a lot of this really starts for them. Johnson was still in charge because he hadn't been wounded yet at the Battle of Seven Pines. And during Yorktown, Texas was pretty much used as a rear guard. As a matter of fact, they were used as a rear guard so much that you can list out the areas that they were used as a rear guard. Starting with Yorktown, Williamsburg, Eltham's Landing, working their way down to Seven Pines, as a matter of fact. Now this army comes rolling in here in 1862. It's not really your typical army. A lot of the units are ragtag units from local militias and state militias. Some of the more famous groups that are out here are the Louisiana Tigers, for example. Well, the 4th Texans make a name for themselves out here too, as well as John Bell Hood. Now, the group like the Louisiana Tigers, they were described at one point in time as being worse than the Barbary pirates. They were called criminals and non-soldiers and people that you couldn't train and keep control of. These are the type of people that are fighting along Georgia and Texas out here at the Battle of Gaines' Mill. They're also the reason why some of those first couple of attacks that happened out here on this position at Gaines' Mill failed, because they didn't have the same level of discipline as some of the other soldiers. When Texas comes onto the field, however, a lot of the fighting had already started. It was pretty heavy. Union soldiers were already being pushed back on their heels. AP Hill's failed attacks, Longstreet's failed attack, all helped to further the advance and ended up allowing Texas to push forward out here and be the first to break through. So Texas gets out here with John Bell Hood. And on the 11th of June, the brigade is ordered into town from Seven Pines. That's when things start to change for them rapidly. So Texas is that rear guard we talked about in Seven Pines now. And General Johnson has a plan, and he wants to send them north to reinforce Jackson up in Shenandoah. And he's going to send them past the town and put them on the Danville-Richmond line and send them up there to reinforce that unit. However, by the time the 4th Texas gets to Stanton, Virginia, and gets off that train, there's already a new general in town. General Robert E. Lee has different plans. And he's decided that he's going to take Jackson and do a surprise attack out here against the Federals that seem to be exposed near the Chickahominy. That means Texas has got to come back. But within 10 days, Texas has covered nearly 400 miles distance between Stanton and being out here. Corporal Joseph Polly would write and confess his feelings as he was marching out in this direction. When I first knew we were going in, I trembled, and my heart seemed to be palpitating way down on the region of my boots. He was shaken to his core, knowing that he was about to go in the fight. Anybody that's been involved in any conflict knows that feeling. Even if they're just going near where the conflict is, in and out of a region known to have death and destruction due to fighting. You get that feeling deep down in your core. That tremble, that nervousness that he talks about. On the 27th of June, 1862, dawn broke, and the 4th was on the march. They were headed out towards Gaines Mill. These men that were so brave and so daring, so ready to get into the fight, could now hear cannons firing in the distance, the thunder of battle. And that's when the men started to write about the apprehension. Later, they would talk about feeling apprehensive about marching towards death. As they started to march out in this direction, that's when they started to see the wounded being carted off and carried back behind the lines from Gaines Mill. It was the first time a lot of them started to see a real serious fight break out. And they were marching in this direction, and they knew it was only a matter of time before they would be involved in the destruction that was up ahead. Out in the woods here around me and across these fields in front of me, AP Hill and Longstreet had already launched 2 unsuccessful attempts to go across these fields and break the Federals. Behind me there, Porter had himself one heck of an artillery unit set up. They were in a very good position out here. When we get out to the clearing, we'll talk about the position. We'll talk about the how the hill was set up, how the trees played a part, and Bosun's Creek. So now after those 2 unsuccessful attempts where Hill and Longstreet weren't able to break the lines, Lee rides up Telegraph Road, and Texas comes out here just in the nick of time, lines up and can see what's happening in front of him. And you have John Bell Hood out here too. Lee looks and asks him firmly, "Do you think you can break those lines?" The only thing John Bell Hood can say at that time is, "I will try." And that's exactly what he did. Got his men lined up, and they got ready for the fight so that they would try. So General Whiting gets out here and he takes a look in that direction. And he sees a hilltop where there's cannons placed. He looks at Hood and he directs him over there and he says, "That is the objective. That's the place that we have to go to. That is where your men will pierce the line." General Hood knows that he's got one heck of a fight on his hands. And the field out in front of him is completely cleared open. When you look around here, what you see is a completely open field. Now right now there's a bunch of corn out here, but at the time, the soldiers would have trampled down anything that was in the field. So they get out here to the clearing, and they see that there's a wooded patch down below. So between them, they've got clear open field where the cannons are firing and able to hit them all the way across from the other side of those trees. Then there's a slope that goes down past the woods, straight out into Bosun's Creek. Down there at Bosun's Creek, it's a small creek, and it's nothing but mud. So now you're slowed down by the creek. Not to mention, having a formation in those tree lines, probably not going to happen. So he tells his men, "Do not fire until I give the order." And his intentions behind that is to not slow them down or stop them. Because if he slows them down, allows them to fire, they're going to break their formation, they're going to reload and get prepared for another volley. So he tells them, "Don't fire." But somewhere over there in that tree line, an officer gives them the order to let out a volley. And then that's when Hood yells, "Don't stop here. Forward, forward." And then without giving them the chance to reload, he orders them to fix bayonets and charge at the double quick. So now for a little battlefield orientation. This direction that we just came from here, out there in that cornfield, this was the clear open field that we're talking about. Right past those trees, that's where the artillery is set up in an opened up hill. And there's a hill called Turkey Hill out near that area too. That tree line there was here historically. And the slope goes downhill and then back uphill. And out there in that tree line, there's a creek called Bosun's Creek. So somewhere near this position, John Bell Hood and the Texans line up to get ready to go into the fight. And it's well after 4 p.m. John Bell Hood would write later, "In a moment, I determined to advance from that point, to make a strenuous effort to pierce the enemy's fortifications, and if possible, put him to flight, and gave positive instructions that no man should fire until I gave the order. And for I knew full well that if the men fired, they would halt to load and break the alignment, and very likely never reach the breastworks." So he'd already pre-planned this going into this fight here at Gaines Mill. It was in his mindset, lining these men up, that if they halted right here on these open fields to fire, that they would instinctively reload their carbines and break their lines, halting the progression. So now the 4th Texas steps off, and they're walking in the direction that I'm going right now. With every step of the way, their lines are starting to thin. We're talking cannonade firing in this direction, one shot after another. Fire from all directions. They're in this open up field. As the lines start to thin, they've already been ordered, don't fire back. Hold your fire until I give you the order. So now these men are toting these rifles on their shoulders, going into this fight, not able to fight back yet. And here in a minute, we'll go down to that area where Warwick told them to open up a volley. So at some point in time, a Private John Summers had a white terrier out here that he named Candy. And this white terrier got separated from the unit and from the owner. Unfortunately for Private Summers, he would be killed out here on this field. His terrier would find his body. Candy would crawl up underneath the arm of John Summers and lay there with the body all day and all night, and wait for someone to come. Finally, the forces would come around and find his body and cart him off to be buried. And people remarked at what a sad scene it was when they found that terrier laying underneath the arm of that soldier, still snuggling up to their friend, right to the bitter end. So 4th Texas starts to see those initial skirmishers, and they get down to the line of trees here, and they start making their way down that position where we talked about, the slope that went down into the ravine. Every step of the way, whether it be the position itself or a cannonball or something taking them out, every single step of the way, that line was getting thinner and thinner. We're now going in the direction that the 4th Texas would have been going towards that ravine. And as you can tell, as we're going down here, the slope's pretty steep as you're headed down through this tangled brush and trees. And once you get past that line out there, there's no real clear sight or line of sight. So you're not really able to tell exactly what's down here waiting on you. But Texas gets out here and flushes out the skirmishers. The skirmishers start to scurry down towards Bosun's Creek, back in that direction there, just straight off ahead. And one soldier describes his charge going down this hill to the creek, that once he got to the breastworks here, got up and over them, and then down into the creek bed, he lost one of his shoes down there, headed towards Porter's cannons, and the 5th Massachusetts too. So we're about at the position right now where Warwick would have ordered that unauthorized volley. And General Hood yells, "Don't stop here. Forward, forward." And with those words, he could sense things were changing. Immediately after the volley had been given, he tells the men to fix bayonets, charge at a double quick. The men come down here, rushing through this location that I'm at right now. And they get themselves into the underbrush, the swampy area here, where Bosun's Creek is. And they get to the other side. And right after that, that's right about the time that Warwick ends up receiving his wound that would kill him. So now all of the Federal soldiers are scurrying up this hill. It's directly in front of me that I'm about to go up right now. And they're making their way up here pretty quick. The Confederates have been pushing line after line to get up and above this hill to try to get to that exposed area where the cannons are. They make their way up there pretty quickly. The Federals are now evacuating their position pretty quickly. And there's not much that they can do at the top of that hill. I'll turn around here so you can see the direction I'm going. Straight up at the top of that hill is where the Federal cannons are. Aiming straight down in this direction, if your soldiers are charging up that hill because they're running for their lives, you've got no place to fire. Now the position is tenuous. It's terrible because where they're going now, they're headed towards the cannons. Cannons can't fire because the cannons are going to hit their men going downhill when the cannons are firing at the enemy coming uphill. So they're having to hold their fire until the men get past them. But there's a mixture of men, confusion all around, soldiers dropping left and right. One soldier describes it as rats scurrying across the deck of a burning ship, as all these Yankee soldiers are fleeing past their own men and leaving their cannons, which were a big part of the support out here, to fend for themselves. It must have been one heck of a sight. Lieutenant Roundsavall ended up losing his arm here, roughly at this location that we're at right now, where the 4th Texas was. His brother, however, lost his life. And that's just some of the examples of the death and destruction that happened out here with these units at the Battle of Gaines Mill, particularly 4th Texas. The casualty rate was pretty high for them. We'll discuss that here in a little bit. And one soldier described the destruction out here, and he said, "It seemed every ball found a victim. So great was the slaughter, Yankees fled like rats from a burning ship." That was that quote that I was talking about earlier. Right after that, that's when Lieutenant Colonel Warwick would be shot through the lungs and killed. He would die a few days later. So now the sun's starting to go down in the sky. And as the Confederates get up to the position where the Yankee cannons are, they've started to push everybody out from that position. And now they're trying to turn the line. But all of a sudden, one soldier explains the trembling that they felt underneath their feet. And that's when a bit of irony hits. John Bell Hood formerly had a command in the 5th Cavalry. John Bell Hood's new command, here with the 4th Texas, is about to get approached by that 5th Cavalry. One soldier described how in awe he was at the signs of the glistening bayonets charging in their direction, the horses at full speed as they stood there on that field, waiting for the cavalry to attack them. At night, in these woods around here in the fields surrounding the area, Hood's men collapsed to the ground, exhausted from the day's fighting and all the marching that happened before that. At night, a couple of the soldiers in the regiments started to go out and try to find men and recover them from the fields. And shortly after midnight, they stopped searching. But it wasn't until that next morning when they mustered up for duty that they realized just how bad it was out here. The devastation and the total loss that Texas received out here, 4th Texas specifically. That morning, they saw so many men laying out across these fields. And even the people back at the hospitals in Richmond said it was some of the saddest things that they'd ever seen up until that point. Now you gotta remember, this is 1862. This is the 7 days battles. Nothing had really been seen like this around here before. There have been a couple of large battles before that. But unfortunately, for the people back then, things were just getting started. That morning, General Hood rides over to his old regiment, and he looks down at them, and he sees the numbers are really small. And he asks them where everyone is. And one of the soldiers from that unit looks up at him and says, "General, this is all that's left of us." Well, that same soldier said that Hood pulls out the handkerchief and he tries to hide his tears from the men. He turned away from his unit, devastated by the loss and the amount of people that died that day. And he tried to cover his tears up. But they saw it. They saw the devastation. Saw it all over his face because they understood it just as well as he did. So in the end, what do you get out here? Well, you get a temporary victory for the Confederates. They would push on and fight some more and end up in larger battles, more devastating battles. But honestly, no single charge across any field during the American Civil War would amount to the charge that happened here that day, that evening, when Texas came across this field. This is one of the largest grand assaults to happen during the American Civil War. For the 4th, 44 of their men would be killed, 208 of them would be wounded, and one would end up missing. Out of the leadership of the 4th, Colonel Marshall, Lieutenant Colonel Warwick would all be dead. Major Key would be wounded. 3 captains and 7 lieutenants would be killed or mortally wounded at the end of this battle. That's a huge impact to any unit, especially the 4th. We're talking about one regiment here. We're not talking about the entire brigade. This battle turns out to earn John Bell Hood and the Texas Brigade their reputation for General Lee. And they would go on to fight larger battles and ultimately make greater charges and lose more men right up until the end of the American Civil War. Well, I've had fun out here in this blazing heat. I'm in the position right now where those cannons would have been that we talked about during the fight, up at the top of the hill here. And I'm walking towards the direction where 4th Texas came from, here straight across in the direction that I'm at right now, and where they would have seen those cavalry soldiers rushing in to try to prevent the complete and total loss here. Which it didn't work. Union soldiers had to give the ground up, and the Confederates would win this battle here at Gaines Mill and move on to the next position. The only thing that stops the complete and total destruction of that army at that time was the fact that it got so dark so fast. Nighttime fell and the fighting stopped. The crushing victory would end that night, and they would go on to fight more fights. And McClellan would continue to backpedal and end up leaving Richmond behind. I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you learned a little bit about 4th Texas out here at Gaines Mill. Till next time, this is History with Waffles.